Hey, welcome to the Camden Otis Show. It's Whiskey Tuesday, so uh, boy, that's good. A little bit of Jameson's table whiskey. It's 5 o'clock somewhere, and I'm actually in Tucson. This is a live show, not a virtual show for the first time.
Second, I think. First time we did one over Christmas.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, we did do one at Christmas time. That's right. So that makes it number two. Wow, one more and it'll be a tradition, won't it? All right. Well, a lot going on. The mountain off to the west is
North.
north. The mountains in Tucson, and for those of you who don't know, the mountains in Tucson are in the wrong place. If you live in Colorado, they are not in the right location in Tucson.
That Colorado sense of direction doesn't get you very far from the state.
Yeah, it messes up. But the mountains to the north of Tucson are on fire. So the beautiful blue sky, desert sky that we normally get makes me feel like I'm in LA. So it's gray and hazy, almost like the mountains on fire. So hopefully that doesn't that's not going too bad. COVID is still going on. The protests for George Floyd, or really not for George Floyd, for against police brutality are still going on. George Floyd was killed and then died in police custody while being subdued. Unfortunate for that man. Hopefully some changes will be made in the right direction. We've all seen how those things can happen, and really, that's something. Since we're free flowing a little bit, some people have asked me about that occasionally, Camden. What's going on, and how do you fix it? And I've got one word for it, and that's, take a guess. Go ahead.
Accountability.
No. Oh, geez.
Communication.
No. Oh man, what is this? Grizzlies rugby? Leadership.
There you go.
Leadership.
Well, good leadership is all about accountability.
That's right. And standards. Upholding standards, establishing and upholding standards. And what's the right word? What's the answer? Protect the golden egg. No, it's communication. You're right. Communication, because you can't be a good leader unless you communicate, right? So a good leaders would identify these problems before they happen, would take charge, be responsible for establishing standards and upholding standards. When you don't have standards, or really just as bad, whether you have them or not, if you don't follow them and don't enforce them, then you might as well not have them. I mean, that to me is the foundational problem. And I've seen it in the military and I've seen it in business. And now it's coming out in the public eye in police forces. And I wish I knew the stat, but I mean, it's got to be over 100,000 different police forces in the U.S., right?
And I think one of the pieces of it, and when you have these conversations, most people, because that's the big thing everyone wants to talk about right now, is sit down and have these conversations, have the tough conversations, and really go through and talk about things and understand other people's perspectives and go beyond your personal viewpoints on things. But I think where it gets hung up so many times is we want to have that conversation, and we might be talking with our friends and our family and talking about these tough subjects, but then when it really comes down to is then, well, what do we do? Everyone wants that three word tagline of like, how can I fix this right now? What can we do to stop this? It's easy, you just have this one solution. But the problem is that far too often, like we've talked about before, when you try to fix things without fully understanding where the problem is coming from and what's causing these things to happen, you wind up either not fixing the problem or hurting the people that you're trying to help. And that's something where, in as much as you have understand the emotional side of things, and it's a very important piece of it, but you also have to be able to take that little bit of a step back and look at things and really look at the giant problem that is in there and look at the multivariate solutions that aren't fun.
Thank you, General Schranko.
And look at the multivariate solutions that aren't fun. and they're dry and they're boring. There's a reason that it's people like freaking economists talking about this stuff. They're not exciting stuff to talk about, but those things are the actual lasting solutions. Because when you just do something out of a gut reflex, you can overcorrect's not necessarily the right word, but you can do something that just
Well, it
doesn't.
becomes a rash decision, and rash decision, the definition of a rash decision is you don't take into consideration what the effects are of that decision.
Right. Exactly. And I think that's something that's just very important to think about right now, as far as looking at all of these different factors and understanding the complexity of the solution, as complex to the situation, so that you can have a complex solution that is going to address those problems. And it's something, to take it, and the example we started off with the protest and with the killing of George Floyd. It's something where it's very easy to say the police need to not be killing people. And that is a very simple thing that we can all get on the same page with. But then the problem is it's not that simple. It's kind of like when you talk about, solving world hunger and things like that. And people say, well, just feed people. Just, we have enough food, just feed people. There's so many complexities that go into those things. And it's one where, kind of going back to something, my favorite phrase since we used on the show a week or two ago, the imagined malice, where even though an individual could have malice in their heart, and they could, evil people exist. I don't think there's any disagreement on that.
Yeah.
But
there are bad people everywhere, believe
exactly. me. And those bad people are a problem, but when you have accountability and things, you can address that. But when you look at when you have this imagined malice and you make it out to be this big thing, you make it out to this easy good and evil battle, because we all love this basic good and evil. It's us versus them, that basic psychology. And we like to boil it down to something simple because it's easy to look at. We don't like to look at the complexities of the situation. Just pick any problem. There's 330 million Americans, and there's probably about 200 million different opinions, give or take.
I would say there's 330 different opinions, 330 million different opinions.
But when you look at things like that, you have to understand there's all these different opinions on fixing things. But the step that we have to get past is understanding that people do want to solve the problems, and moving it to the point where it's no longer a discussion of is this good or bad, as much as we just have different ways of looking at the problem and different ways of solving things.
Well, and I, along that line, one of the things I was thinking about as you were saying that is, the microwave generation. That's what my generation is, well, however that's phrased, is the microwave generation, meaning we grew up with microwaves, so we put something in the oven, put it on for 30 seconds. Excuse me, and it's done. Well, I don't know if I'm the microwave generation. What's that make you?
Oh my God!
I mean, the nano generation. Right. I don't nanowave generation maybe, but the problem is this is, it's like losing weight. You gain weight over time, over weeks and days of eating and not working out. You gain weight. You don't flip a switch and lose weight. You have to go through a path and corrective actions, if you will, or not, I don't want to say corrective, but a changed habits to lose the weight. That's what this is. It has been a problem that has been in existence for many, many years, and has been developed, and has been, I don't want to say institutionalized, but it's been allowed.
Right.
Because institutionalized means that the institution allows it. And there's some screwy laws in the books and things like that.
The difference of something naturally growing in a negative way versus being designed in a negative way. I think it's something important to look at. And it kind of goes back to the imagined malice thing of, it's a very big difference of something becoming what it was not meant to be versus something being designed to be something wrong like that. It's something, when you're looking at something like this that has all these different complexities, it's easy to look at it as something that is just a quick fix. We just solve this one problem, we just kick out all the racist cops. Very easy, right? But what it really comes down to is, it's not like with the police, it's not something where folks are being trained to go do that. It's something where you have people who were bad people who went through a training, and then because there's not the accountability that we've talked about to correct those type of things, those behaviors, get entrenched, and it just kind of feeds and feeds and feeds. It's not this conscious effort of someone behind the curtain trying to pull the strings and make all this bad stuff happen. It's the fact that the incentives don't line up. There's not a proper feedback loop. I know I waited, what, 10 minutes to say
Yeah, you
incentives?
got incentives in already.
But you don't have this proper feedback loop, and bad things are going to happen like that. I mean, there's so many countless examples of just, if you're not directly responsible and you're not held accountable for what you're doing, you can start doing a bad job. Look at, okay, here we go, agriculture. Tying it into agriculture, of course. One of the big interesting things, and we talked about this with Devon and Dr. Quello, that you see with local agriculture, one of the big pieces of strength that it has is the accountability that you get. When you know your farmer and your farmer knows you, they're going to make sure that you have the best quality food because they know you, you're their neighbor, and you have that sort of accountability. When you have a long drawn out process, and Devon, I'm not coming at big farms this time, I'm just saying, but when you have this long drawn out supply chain and you have that disconnect between the consumer and the producer, you wind up with those negative effects. And those negative effects build and build and build if you don't do anything about them and if you don't hold anyone accountable. And then you wind up with terrible things happening.
Well, to stay in that analogy, it's your quality control process, right? So you can have an infinite length of a food chain, and that infinite length of a food chain can still provide good quality food at the other end, as long as there is a quality control process within that food chain.
Right.
And that's the same thing we get back to. We talk about policing and attitudes and things like that. If there's not somebody checking and ensuring that the processes are being followed, like the hold that was done on George Floyd that eventually killed him, the knee down on the neck, you can do that. But if you do that for an extended period of time, if you do that with somebody that has any kind of respiratory things, I mean, it's pretty obvious that something's going to go wrong.
Right.
Right. And that training, not to say, the officer that did that, and I can't think of his name, whether or not he's racist or not, I don't know. Okay. He was a white dude. There were dudes of color standing around there. So whether or not he was doing it because it was a racism thing or doing it out of malice or doing it from ignorance, and I tend to lean more toward, because I'm much more of the optimist, half glass full, glass half full, that he was doing it out of ignorance.
Right.
Yeah. You can't breathe, tough shit. Come on, criminal.
Right.
Quit fighting me, criminal. In that sort of sense, not realizing, because it's like the taser or the pepper spray. Those are tools that we've given police that are less than deadly force to use. And depending on the police force, they get certain kinds of training, and those can still kill people.
Right.
If they're improperly used or used on somebody that, that has other conditions, extenuating circumstances that could affect them. Right. So until they're properly trained, and this goes into something else that I've always been a big believer in. Dave Ramsey talks about it, and setting up your team for success. Part of that setting them up for success is providing them the proper training to be able to succeed at their job. And Neil deGrasse Tyson. Yes, Neil deGrasse Tyson. There we go. That's the guy I was looking for. Said something. I caught a little snippet video of his the other day, and he said, I can't remember what the first police force was, but one police force, 4 months of training. New York City, 6 months of training. Become a culinary chef, 8 months of training.
Right.
Now, what's the cost, Mr. Economist? Right. What's the cost?
Well, and so this is actually something interesting that I've talked with a few people about as we're having these conversations about things and trying to, frankly, come up with the creative solutions for things, because the creative solutions generally speaking, the ones that are more outside the box are things that you're going to see being more effective and having effective change because it's not working inside the normal constraints. And one of the pieces of that, and something you see a lot of people talking about, and Dallas police chief gave a speech talking about this 2 years ago after that police officer was killed in Dallas, that we as a society basically are asking police officers to do too many different jobs. They're doing too much. Their workload is through the roof, and the variety is all over the place. And it's something where you have to look at different situations there and different levels of training for it. And the same type of thing when you're talking about the cost. Does every single, okay, so this is where it gets into a muddy area, but if you're looking at people who are doing more minor violations, traffic, things like that, do they need the same level of training as somebody who's responding to an active shooter? Not necessarily. But you have to look at that as the cost and benefit of, we need to put that money into this and go into the proper training and give these people the tools they need to be successful, because the cost when things go wrong is just so astronomical. It's one of those, there's lots of studies about, like, if you actually factor it out, like how much a human life is worth, and it's X hundreds of thousands of dollars, but there's a number there.
Yeah, that one's from the 9/11 Commission of Economics. Yeah,
it's on there, and he's talking about how it was his job to find the value of a human life.
Yeah,
it's freaking impossible for us to quantify. It's terrible to talk about, but when you're going through and you're dealing with paying money for people who have been wrongfully killed, you figure out those type of numbers. And it's one of those where it's like, even if we just take an arbitrary number, call it $1 million that a human life is worth, or 100,000, those numbers are still going to be way bigger on the cost side than what you're looking at as far as the training goes. But I think, like, kind of going back to the beginning of that statement, it's something where there's a complicated solution to it. It's not, so I've seen people talk, and I've had a few friends throw this one out, of all police officers should get 4-year degrees. Hey, would that be great? Yeah. But also then you have to look into the complicated side of things of how much does an entry-level police officer get paid? That's not 4-year degree money.
No.
And so it's there, that's where it gets into it. You have to have a more complicated, nuanced solution for these type of things, because it's not as simple as just saying, give them more training, give them this, because the way that the labor demand works for the job, it's not going to sort out that way. Nobody's going to want to go to school for 4 to 6 years to go do a job that they
be a beat cop.
Yeah, and to not make as much money as their degree was costing. Just basic economic choice there.
No, it's I think you know what else it reminds me of, and you know me, I'm always pulling things from other sources and ideas and other stories, and this is where I get concerned about truly finding a solution is, and you look at Afghanistan, you look at Iraq, go back, a little bit more, you look at Kosovo, you look at Bosnia, you look at Haiti.
You're showing your age.
Yes. Well, no, I'm showing that I've been to all those places, which does show my age. Been involved in all those operations and conflicts. Yeah. Well, I mean, kind of, but really what I'm getting at is each of those places that we've done some things in operations in. Iraq, great example. Take Saddam Hussein out of power. Right, wrong, or indifferent, it's done, it's happened. But our patience to get to a true stable solution ends very quickly. Yeah. Because I look back, and when you think about Germany after World War II, Japan after World War II, Korea, South Korea after the Korean armistice, and look how long we've been there in those nations and helping those nations become stable nations, and to use my old part of society sort of thing, a contributor to society and not a malice or menace to society. That took decades. And Afghanistan and Iraq, we tried to band-aid it and go, all right, we're out, success. President Bush, mission accomplished, and fly off, and doesn't work that way. And that's my fear with this, like you were talking about earlier, is it's not there is no quick solution to this. This is, I mean, an ultimate multivariate problem that we as a nation, this is so much different than any of those. But the problem and my concern is the that's done now, move on to the next thing. Oh, we got an election. Oh, COVID's back, whatever. So, yep, we did something. We protested. Congress passed some bill.
Mhm.
Now I'm out moving forward. And that's not going to fix it.
Right.
Wholeheartedly, that will not fix it.
And it's something where, like, you're completely right. You have to look at the complexity of it. And I think this is another piece that I think where people get so confused, and where you wind up having tempered rise in these kind of conversations a lot, is we look at these things and you have to be able to separate the different problems and their causes. And so just to take the example we've been following as far as the police brutality, there is America has a dark history with racism. It is something that is intertwined, and it's something that we all want to overcome. It's something I'm my favorite, and I'm going to butcher it. So I don't even know why I try to paraphrase people anymore. But I know Martin
No,
Luther.
you can paraphrase them, you just can't quote them.
Right. So I'll paraphrase a Martin Luther King Jr. quote. It's about it's not about changing what America is. It's about going back to what we were originally promised. And that goes to all sorts of different people of all sorts of different creeds and ethnicities throughout the country. It's really about going back to what we were all promised in that Constitution, because different folks, whether they're malicious or not, did a bad job of giving that freedom to everybody. And it's very different to look at something to where you need to give a sorry, somebody walked by, so that completely broke my train of thought. But it's and there's a little kid too. So it's about finding something and going back to that. So when you look at, okay, I got it back. Oh wow, that's sorry, we might need to cut that one out. But it's something where it's like you look at it, and so you take the police brutality, you take the racism. Those are two very different. They're intertwined in places, but they're two very different problems. As far as having these conversations and things go, and being open to people and listening to different people's perspective, that can do a lot for a lot of the racial tensions that you're seeing. Does having a conversation with your Black friend really help you to solve police brutality? Not necessarily. There's a completely different problem set there, and you have to be able to look at it as a different type of solution, and then have those conversations. Like I said, they can be intertwined. These are complicated things, and these things can touch on each other, and they can feed on each other, and they can have negative feedback loops and all that kind of stuff. But when you're looking at solutions, a lot of the time the solutions wind up being something completely separate. When you look at, there are like all sorts of solutions have been thrown out as far as the police brutality stuff goes nowadays. A lot of those solutions are really good, and none of them are written with any sort of racial undertones, because that's not the thing that needs to come in to solve that problem. Is it something else that needs to be solved? Is it a problem? Yes, but it's something where it's a different problem that requires a different solution and a different mindset to go forward with
Yeah, and they did walk by, and it threw me off too. So it's always funny how you can get sidetracked. But it is so true and so important that there's police training, and then there's I'll just coin it as this: a tribal breakdown. One of the things that's been a real issue in Afghanistan is that Afghanistan is not a nation; it is a geographic area of tribes, and somewhat the same in Iraq, but not quite as much. In some areas on the continent of Africa, have some similar issues where 100+ years ago, not hundreds, but 100+ years ago, when lines are drawn in Africa, dividing tribes and things like that, has caused a lot of problems. And in America, we didn't. Well, we did, and man, you want to talk about going down a rabbit hole, talking about the American Indian and the whole reservation thing there. We'll save that one for another show, because I don't think that giant handle of Jameson's is big enough to help us walk through that one. But what I'm getting to is this, and you've brought this up once before too, is the tribe. And we have to be careful with how we create tribes and what those tribes do, because a tribe is an important thing to have. We should all have a tribe. But if we all have only one tribe and that tribe is everybody that looks exactly like me and thinks exactly like me, we get a lot of groupthink in the same way and a lot of circular solutions about our tribe. So what we really need is, for lack of a better way of putting it, is an American tribe. We need a Texas tribe, a Tucson tribe. It needs to be more in that sense, as opposed to, or even a neighborhood, starting a neighborhood. Although neighborhoods can tend to be, because of the way our nation grew up with different cultures, that can even tend to be a little too tribal, right?
It's that whole natural pull towards people like you. It's an interesting one, and I think there's also weird political things that have happened that caused things that are at least at the very least exacerbated things. But I think it's one where it's very interesting. I talked with Sierra and Patrick, my older sister, and husband, about this in Houston. Houston is culturally, if you look at it as far as demographics go, it's darn close to 20%, 20%, 20%, 20% as far as different populations and different ethnicities. But when you're there, it's very, this is the white neighborhood, this is the Asian neighborhood. And it's one of those where there's systemic things that can exacerbate those type of issues. But what it really comes down to is we want to be around people like us, because, and this kind of ties back into the whole conversation here, because going outside your tribe and having these conversations with people who have a very different viewpoint, a very different upbringing, different lens they view the world through, it's difficult, because you have to step outside your shell and you have to try to look from their perspective, and it's freaking hard. So we naturally, just because we like the easy way out of things, we go towards people. It's easier to have somebody that you don't fully agree with and go, yeah, sure, yeah, yep, rather than having a conversation with somebody about the ways that you disagree and why you feel those way about things. It's just like if you talk about, like, why do you feel a certain way about anything? It is a completely different conversation to talk about some political policy versus the philosophy that causes you to think the way that you're thinking. And that's something that a lot of people don't grasp on it, that you have to be able to step out and look at, why do I feel this way about certain things? And that's not to say that you can't feel certain ways. We can all feel different ways about stuff. We can all have our own opinions, but it's important to understand where those opinions are coming from. What do you value? What do you feel about that is causing you to lean that sort of way? Just an easy example, and I'll leave it as a broad one, just to kind of illustrate my point here, of I am a military brat. I feel a lot of ways about military things that people who did not grow up around the military just do not get. And I've had long conversations with folks where it's, then to put it broadly, it's like anti-military folks almost, where it's, the Army's bad, Navy's bad, yada, yada, yada. It's not a direct conversation about what we should be doing in different countries or anything. It's this broad feeling that they have. Whereas because of the way I grew up, I don't have that feeling. I grew up more intertwined with it. And it's something we're going back to the golden word of communication, right?
Mm-hmm.
What it takes is the communication, understanding where those people are coming from, so that you can understand why they feel the way that they do. And then you can come up with a complex solution that helps everyone out in that situation.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's the acceptance of other perspectives, right? It's not having judgment because somebody looks at a problem or solves a problem a different way. A great example of this in the rugby world, the high school rugby world in Colorado. Good friend of mine, Amy, had a completely different way of looking at how to grow rugby in the state than I did. She was 100% school based. I was 100% club based. But you know what? Our outcomes were the same. Our outcome was to grow rugby, and we both had the conversation many times over the phone, one-on-one, and in board meetings, where we discussed the pros and cons of each other's perspectives. Realized that she wasn't going to change mine, I'm not going to change hers, but we both had the same outcome in the end, and that was what was important. And that can happen in so many different ways, in so many different situations. It's the other C word. You know what the other C word is?
No, I'm not sure.
Oh man, compromise.
Compromise over.
Yes, Mr. Government, come on. And what did our nation get founded on? Is the ability to compromise and come to a solution to where everybody agrees. I'm going to give a little bit, you're going to give a little bit. Going back to my coaching, Level 5, the win-win situation. How do we both win? How do we all win in this situation? What's the win-win solution? That's where we need to go.
I think that's a great example. And I'll run with that a little bit of, if you go back historically and you go through history books of early days of America, there's so much hostility between different states because different states were so different. They're all just so different as far as who immigrated there, what their economy was like, what their political beliefs were. All that stuff was just so mixed up for all these different things. They're able to find those complex solutions to move forward and have something out of it. But it's one of the things you have to understand, and it kind of goes back to what we're saying here of what you just said as far as the end goal of whatever you're talking about, not the mechanisms that we're arguing, not the policies, but the end goal that we're talking about. And when you look at that, and you can apply this to modern politics too, one of my biggest pet peeves, no matter which side of the political spectrum the person is the whole, they want to watch this country burn. They are, come on, man. They are the same civil servant as you. They just have very different views on what the good thing is to do for the country. If you get up there and you think that any sort of, I mean, pull out any sort of random policy thing, like we said, this is bigger picture than just like specific policy things, so you can argue about. But it's something where if you don't understand that in their mind, this is something that has the same end goal as what you're working towards, it's just two completely different mechanisms. You're not going to be able to move forward with any sort of compromise because you're going to be treating them like they're this big evil person. It's and again, going to my economic stuff, it's one of those of, you look at so many different philosophies in economics as far as how to help people and all this kind of stuff and how to fight poverty. You can have this huge misconception of, if I believe in a free market solution, that means that people can just starve because they don't have the money. No, it's just, you have a way, like, there's all sorts of economists who put a lot of time into this, who are huge free market people, but they lose sleep overnight because it's, look, I believe in this mechanism, how do I make it work for everybody? And it's one where you can't write off the outcome. You have to look at it and understand that those individuals are usually on the same page, and we usually all want the same stuff. It's like with when the George Floyd incident first happened, when he was killed by the police officer. That was something where, if you asked every single person, or 99% of people in the country, about that the next day before it became a policy discussion, every single person was disgusted by that. Whether it's a libertarian talking about civil rights and civil liberties and taking away that, or you have someone who's more on the liberal side of the spectrum who's talking about the social justice side of things, we all agreed on the good or bad side of that. It's so simple. But then when you got into the policy stuff, things get muddied. And I think that's an important distinction that people need to make sure they're having when they're having these conversations. And when you're having these conversations with their loved ones, to give a little bit of advice out, you have to be able to agree on basic things like that, and then get into the policy discussions, because policy things get so much stickier, and people hurt their feelings and stuff, because you have that outcome that you believe in. You tie yourself emotionally to that. And when you have people that don't agree with your mechanism, you wind up feeling emotionally attacked, because you're feeling the same way they're feeling, but they're treating you like you're not.
But
it goes back to just understanding and communication of, we're all working towards the same outcome. We all want a better world, but the actual mechanism for how to move forward with those things, where there's a million different solutions out there for, 330 million.
Well, you hit on something that I think is so important, though. It's the emotional aspect of it. And when emotions get involved, our decisions become rash, because emotions create biased decision making. Mm-hmm. And we have to, in order to come up with a long-term viable solution that will work, you can't have emotions involved.
Because emotions change.
Exactly. But emotions also cloud your mind, and they cloud your ability to understand somebody else's perspectives. When you become emotional, and whether it's crying or yelling or whatever that emotion may be, it affects decisions. All right. If you're feeling lucky, if the lightning struck the tree next to you, it didn't kill you, you found $20 on the ground right after that, so you decide to go to the 7-Eleven and buy a big lottery ticket because you think you're going to win the lottery. That's a rash decision. Those are rash decisions being made. And the same thing, if I'm pissed off about something, I'm going to make a rash decision. So we have to remove the emotions. And that's the hard part, because this hits so hard at some people's, it really, when you start to talk about, injustice, the word injustice,
It hurts.
it pulls, yeah, it really hurts and drives at something and deep down in our soul. Because what do we all want? Common people, good people want justice for all, right? Right. That everybody wants the opportunity for everybody to be taken care of, everybody to be happy and live as they see fit. That's justice, right? And when justice is taken away, we become emotional. So you have to do something to stop the emotion. So you got to put the Band-Aid on it, stop the bleeding, stop the hemorrhaging, just like when we were talking about COVID when it first happened in the business sense, right? Where are you hemorrhaging capital? We've got to stop the hemorrhage, which means stop the most emotions, so that we can come up with a rational long-term solution to the problem.
And I think that's something where and this is again where I think there's a nuance to this, that it can't be overstated, that the emotions are still valid. You have every right to feel that way. But that also doesn't mean that you need to act irrationally because of that. And I think this is an interesting way to take this. Go back to, we've talked about this before with rugby and business, of the, oh shit, I missed that tackle moment. You can analyze your game, as a coach or as a player. If you ask me about what happened after a game when I'm coaching, right after the game, you're going to get some negative answers. You're going to get, because there's so much emotion tied up into what just happened. I'm pissed at my players for not working hard enough, or I'm excited about the way that we won the game. And it was there's so many different emotions that are going into that, which is why you got your 24-hour rule, which so many coaches employ. And there's a reason they employ that. Because when you wait 24 hours and you step back a little bit and you look back on things, you realize the things that were small or were big or whatever. Like, hell, take the rugby example right there. How many times have I gotten punched in the face during a rugby game? You ask me what my feelings are about UCLA directly after that game. I hate every single person that ever went to that school. Now, the next day when we're talking about it, it's like, hey, did I knee him before he punched me? And and you start realizing the full perspective on those type of things. But you have to let yourself get out of that emotional state. Same thing goes for business. We'll take the easy example, low-hanging fruit right here, of the last Verbi virtual fundraiser on Friday. We sat down, Norman, my CTO, we sat down and we went through and we were talking about the night of all these different things. And I kept on trying to think, look, we need to stop.
Your pre-mortem.
Yeah, well, so this was a post-mortem, it was the night of. So,
oh, you did it the night of. Okay, I misunderstood you.
A 24-hour rule, and it's hard to do because you want to analyze everything, you want to do it all there, but also, like, you're just so full of all of that emotion from that situation. Like, we're running an event, like, you can ask Norman or my fiance, who's outside and she was in the event, of what my energy level was like during that. That is not a rational decision maker. I was stopping the bleeding on things that needed to stop the bleeding, and I was running around with my head.
You were in reaction mode.
Exactly.
Full on reaction mode.
And when you're in reaction mode and you start trying to solve complicated problems, you come up with, frankly, shitty solutions. And those are things that aren't going to actually solve the problem.
Well, it's the baling wire and duct tape solution, vice the go to the store and buy the right part.
See, I haven't been on a good farm with ranching long enough for way too long of, oh my gosh, the things you can do with baling wire.
If you don't carry baling wire around with you all the time and some duct tape, I mean, you can fix just about anything. Hold on a bumper, you can plug a flat tire. I mean, there's a lot you can do with it.
But how long does that work?
It gets you there.
It gets you there.
That's it. That's it. It's not a solution.
It's these things. That's something important to recognize as you're going through. Is first, is the emotional response to these things justified? 110 freaking percent. Is there full reason to go out and act on that emotion? Yes, we can fully understand that. But then it goes into the next order of effects of, then how can we remove the emotion from this to analyze this fully and find the solution that will actually prevent these things from happening? And it's one, and I think this statement will just help to illustrate the point for folks who don't necessarily think this way. Of when I was having these conversations with the guy I mentioned, Norman, my CTO, good friend of mine, we were talking about this, and I go, but what's the thing that's gonna not do anything for 5 years but actually solve this problem? Because in the weirdest way, that's the stuff that works. And we don't like to think that way, but there's so many things where it's like, does it actually do anything immediately? No. And yes, then okay, maybe you need something else to help the emotional side. I understand that as well. But it's like, as far as solving the systemic problems, you're not going to see the effects of things for a long time. Like
It's a generation. It's a generational thing,
generation
and
I think so Colorado Senate passed a bill that did a lot of things as far as transparency with police and all this type of stuff. I think that's a great step. I'm a fan of it. It's also one where it's like, do you think that's going to do anything tomorrow? Do you think that's going to do anything next week? No, but will that do something in the long run? Hopefully. And that's the type of solutions you have to be looking for, because when you look for something that's going to do something right now, it's something that's usually not sustainable in the long run.
mm-hmm. Well, and just reminded me of I remember in Bosnia, when I was in Bosnia Herzegovina, it was part of the Yugoslavian Republic, and it broke up in the early '90s. And
I'm glad you got to that, because I was trying to show your age with that a little bit
yeah, thanks. Broke up into Croatia, Bosnia Herzegovina, Serbia, and one more. I'm drawing a blank on which one that is. But anyway, the point of the matter is that there was a institutional based racism in that country, where it was very, it wasn't subtle, but it wasn't open. It was in a different class, where the Serbs were different than the Bosnians, and to the point of names, and this is one of those things, the outsider, me, the American being there, couldn't see it, but a local could. And I've experienced the same thing in East Africa, going back to there too a couple of times. But what it was there was an institutional thing that started in the elementary schools with the education system and how they were educated about, the Bosnian Muslims were lower class, and the Serbs were the Serb child had the nice coat, and the Muslim Muhammad had the crappy shoes and stuff like that in the child book. And that's institutional racism that takes generations to a generation, I should say, not generations. If there's effort put into it,
right.
if there's effort put into change, one generation can do it. And bringing it back home, and kind of bring us back to the solution, and actually go back into our buddy Paul and the micro missions. That can start now with attitudes and discussions, because one of the things that I always look towards, and put in a lot of effort, and I have my entire life, is I always look beyond anything of color. I mean, I can't say, I mean, I've made mistakes. I've fallen into cultural stereotypes. I've fallen into the group that I might be with at the time.
Fallen into the group thing.
Yeah, really. The group think. But in the end, as an individual, my goal has always been, I've never looked at somebody in that sense, and it's an addition to what they are. It's not who they are. It's, oh yeah, oh that's what color his skin is. I didn't know that.
It's a factor of equation. It's a factor in the equation, but it is not a big factor type of thing. Or it's obviously something that
it's an afterthought.
It's something that we all have. We all come from different backgrounds, and it's something where you can even boil it down to something smaller. I have friends out from California. They have a whole another different upbringing, a whole other lifestyle than we had out in Colorado. Yeah. Those type of things.
Well, and yours,
it's still a factor.
And yours was a military upbringing also, which is a very integrated society, and very much you've got the uniform on, do your job. I don't care what color your skin is underneath the uniform.
Which also came from around all this kind of stuff, the different cultures you look at, of trying to look at those type of things, and it's like it's obviously, it's like, do you want to, nobody should be using the freaking BS answer. I don't see color. Like, shut the hell up. But what do you let that influence your decisions and your actions? That's the difference. And when you stop those things from influencing you, you can see people for what they really are, what their upbringing is, and all this type of stuff. And you can help to see things through their lens and see the way that their world is framed. And it does so much for your perspective to understand that from so many different things. It's like, I was going to say easy one, but that's my upbringing. It's an easy one. It's an easy one for me.
Yeah.
But I know, like, going back to like a bunch of my best friends that grew up in California, and I talk to them about guns. Oh my gosh, it's a bad word in California. But to me, it's just no. Like, of course we have guns. Like, think about when we went to Wales, a rugby tour to Wales. I remember I was talking with the Welsh boys, and they asked, like, Camden, do you have guns? I go, yeah. And they go, like, how many? And I remember thinking, like, I'm not 100% sure how many guns my family has. They're like, what? You don't even know? Because it's just, to them, it's just so different. But to me, it was just a part of the way I grew up. And you can pull any other sort of example for different cultural upbringings about what those different things are. And it goes back to, when you're really looking at the problem solving, you have to understand those different perspectives in order to have a proper solution for things.
Yeah, 100%. And going back, we went down a rabbit hole to something I was kind of trying to bring us back.
Thing was a rabbit hole.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. I was trying to bring us back to the barns. Good thing the bottle of whiskey ain't in the room with us right now.
We would have finally done the Joe Rogan 4 hours.
Yeah, this would have been a JRE, no doubt. But really, what I was getting back to is what can we do now? What can you, the individual person, do at this point? And I mean, I say it tongue in cheek, and I've said it before, and I don't say it tongue in cheek. Really, I shouldn't say it that way, because that means it's a joke. But what I really think that we can do is, you smile, you say howdy, and you help people.
For Californians, you can say hello. It's the proper translation.
Or hey y'all. And usins, what you guys up to? You can say all those things. Yakshin Mash if you're Polish, but all those things, if you just start to say that, and it breaks down stereotypes, and you say it to everybody, no matter when or where you are, and you do those little things, it makes the little things make the big difference, right? It's the, like, I go back to Paul and Pat, right? His partner Pat with the Green Marine micro missions. Make your micro mission to say howdy, hi, whatever your phrase is, depending on where you are, your culture, to 5 people every day. You may have to get out and walk around the block until you see 5 people, depending on where you live and depending on how much quarantine you got going on. But if you made just a little bit of a mission like that, think of the difference that could make in the world.
And I think this one where I think people want to write those things off because, and totally justifiably, it's not the long-term solution for things. But when we're talking about all of these different problems and these multivariate problems, that means you can have multiple solutions for different pieces of that problem.
Oh, yeah.
And we can work towards something in a broader sense, whether it's legislative or whatever, that is going to have lasting change to prevent things from negative things from happening in the future. But then it's also, what can you do right now? And it is 100% that of talking to people, understanding their perspective, and just listening to folks and having those conversations and being nice to people. Because it's just like we talked about last week with Paul, that we're all so much more alike than we are different. And we don't think that way for some reason. I don't. Frankly, I don't fully get it. Maybe eventually one of my behavioral science books will explain that phenomenon to me. But you can't. We're all different. We all have different perspectives on things. But in so many ways, we are cut from the same cloth in so many different fashions. Even if you look from cultural perspectives to going to other countries. So like we're talking, I mean, frankly, this is basically an American conversation we're having,
Yeah.
a lot of the stuff. But when you look at other people from different countries, you can have these type of things. The Farajis, great family friends of ours, they're from Iran. And I've had so many great conversations with Mr. Faraji about all these interesting stuff, because it's just, frankly, he doesn't get my position. I don't get his. And so you have these interesting conversations where it's like, okay, why do you come from that? A great example of it is Angus Peacock.
Mhm.
Of course, Angus and I had this conversation about, and this is a whole another tangent, so don't let us get into it, about paying coaches and how every coach, no matter what level you're doing, should be getting paid, and it shouldn't be a volunteer thing. And he said, Camden, in your free market view, in your capitalist view as an American, why can't you pay coaches? And because that's him with having the wherewithal to understand that, look, I'm coming from a very different perspective. He comes from a very different perspective than we do. But with that perspective, why do you believe that? And that kind of goes back to, and hey, shoot, we're finally going full circle on this. It goes back to what we were saying earlier of understanding why people believe things and understanding why you believe things. If you get upset with some policy, some political thing or whatever, take a step and think about why you feel that way about things, what it is that is important to you as far as that goes. There's people that can value, so we made a comment about guns. There's people whose Second Amendment, it's like that is it, that's all they care about. And
Mhm.
there's people who are, you can pull any sort of issue where it's like that is their thing, that is what they care about, that is tied into their personal culture. Like I made a reference to the military thing, how as a military brat, I have this intertwined piece of my culture and my viewpoints that is going to skew me that direction in so many different ways. But there's so many people that have different perspectives, and you have to stop and think about it. Now, does that, like taking the military thing, does that mean I blindly support that anything that the Army could ever do ever or anything like that? No. But it also means that because of my perspective, I also understand the the I don't, well, I was gonna say millions, I'm not sure if that's true, millions of good people, and the millions, the good work and the goals and the outcomes that they're working towards. And it's one of those where you can easily look at something and go like, oh my gosh, name a conflict during the Cold War. name any conflict. You can look at that and go, oh my gosh, we shouldn't have done that, we shouldn't have done that. But it's also, but do you understand the perspective of why it was done? And do you understand the perspective of why it might not have been done? And those type of things where it's like you really have to ask yourself why you feel that way about certain things, because that will give you a better understanding and it'll help you to feel more connected with people. Because when you just get into that, just arguments about a policy thing, you're getting hung up on the fact that we all want justice, we all want liberty for people. You get hung up on those things, and you, in your mind, you look at it as this oh my gosh, that crazy liberal, he must hate America. He hates freedom. He wants Russia to come take. No, man, it's not. He just views the world differently than you. It's that damn simple sometimes.
Yeah. Man. Well, I think you said it a little bit ago. This rabbit hole was deep. And I'm going to bring us back to the barn. And what'd you learn today, Camden? Yeah.
Ooh,
A
we
lot.
talked about a lot of stuff.
Yeah. This would be what we would call a wide-ranging conversation at this point. So, I'll say, there's a lot of things that I've learned, and it's amazing to hear different perspectives on solution sets. And one of the things that popped into my head just a bit ago was it's a complex problem, but complex problems don't always require complex solutions.
They're stupid simple.
A simple solution, you can have multiple simple solutions to solve a complex problem. We don't have to put it all into one solution set. We can do this, we can do A, we can do B, we can do R and G. I don't, all these things, but if we don't do something simple to move forward and we overcomplicate it, I think that can be a failure to ever come to a true solution to this. And then we're just playing lip service to it. And that's what I've learned and hearing as we're talking this through.
And I think you really hit on something great there, in the sense that as I talk about these crazy solutions and the creative solutions and all this kind of complicated stuff, that doesn't mean that we can just sit and talk about complicated solutions and never actually do anything. And that's something that I think is very important. And if I can, I had something else I learned I had ready, but frankly, the way you put it right there, it really hit home with me. Of you have to be able to do both. Also, you have to understand that we need a complicated long-term solution, but also right now you got to do something to stop the bleeding. And so my original thing of what I learned, I was going to say, I loved the perspective you brought in, bringing up with your experience in other countries during your time in the military, of the tribalism that you see, and how that plays into the larger picture. And it goes into, you have to properly understand the situation in order to realistically apply any sort of solution to
Oh, great, man. Well, let's
here. Cheers, our
we'll cheers our empty glasses, since we didn't bring the bottle in here, because like I said, if we'd had the bottle in here, we'd still be going. Why don't you run us out, Cam?
All right. Thank you all again for listening to today's show. Special thanks to us for joining us today.
Thanks, us.
Yeah, I'm definitely reading from a script. Screwed myself over on. Thank you to our sponsors, MASH, Military and Athletic Strength Hemp Oil, and Verbi Virtual Fundraising. You can check out recent episodes of the Cam and Otis Show on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcast. And check out a full archive at thecamandotisshow.buzzsprout.com. Cam and Otis Show is on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And thank y'all again, and we'll see you next week.